Okay, you should have downloaded the Class 2 workbook and have it available either on hard copy or on screen. And this workshop will focus on, if you look on page 2, the knowledge and skills that you're going to need prior to actually diving into the steps that are involved in writing a research paper. So it's important to really understand and apply these fundamental concepts in order for you to be successful, and successful in the searching of the databases to obtain the appropriate journals. So in the last lesson, while we outlined the steps needed to carry out a research study, and we discussed the importance of locating suitable journal articles, this lesson is going to clarify actually what constitutes appropriate articles. Now, at the end of this lesson, you'll see that you will achieve 6 objectives. And again, I'm on page 2. The first objective, you're going to differentiate between primary and secondary sources. You're going to define empirical research. You're going to name 3 limitations of empirical research. You'll name 4 types of journal articles besides empirical studies. We'll distinguish amongst the various journal articles, and there's actually 5 types. We'll describe the purpose of your research paper. And you can see the outline that we will proceed forward in. So if you look on page 3, I want you to go ahead and define what you think a primary source is versus a secondary source. So go ahead and shut the video off for about 5 minutes and write down what you think the definitions are, and then return back to the video.
Some of your ideas on what a primary source is? Original work, okay. So from the first creator, okay. Did anybody put anything else?
First-hand account.
Yeah. First-hand account, very good. First-hand account. Any other ideas?
Initial information.
Initial information. Can you define that a little more?
Initial meaning in the beginning, because you're the first one to touch it. It's the initial information you're gathering.
Okay, so like if you were doing that phone game, that you were the first one who passed the information on. Okay, good. Any other ideas?
I put author's first book. Author's own words. Author's own words.
Author's own words. Okay, we're going to put a pin in that one because it depends on what the author is talking about. But hold on to that thought, okay? What about secondary sources? What did we think? Yeah.
I said several or another person relating information from another person or another source.
Okay, so sort of again back to that phone game. You're not the first. You might be the second, the third, or the 10th. Okay.
It could be derived out of the primary source.
Derived out of the primary sources. Sure. What else? Anything else?
I'd say word of mouth.
Well, it could be a word of mouth. That's kind of interesting because you know it's not the person who lived it, but sort of like gossip. So
right.
From one to the next. And we all know what happens when there's gossip. The story changes, right? Okay, so let's see how a librarian defines primary sources. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the video.
So once again, go ahead and close this video and click on this link to watch the video on primary versus secondary sources from the Minnesota Historical Society. Once you're done with the video, then come back to this workbook page. So as the video suggests, the greatest difference between primary and secondary sources is the first-hand experience. I wouldn't get too caught up where they had said books where, no, I forgot if they said it was a primary or secondary source. You really can't label it and say make generalizations because some books can be primary sources, others would be secondary sources. So you want to consider not so much whether it's a book or a journal article or a magazine article. You want to consider, is the document or the book or the article, is it written by someone who had first-hand experience? And if it is, then it's more than likely a primary source. If it's not, if it was written by someone else and someone else is quoting the information, then it's a secondary source. Even if let's say a neighbor told you a story and then you told your family the story, technically you would be a secondary source because you didn't have firsthand experience of the story, your neighbor did, and so you're just passing it along. So you want to think of it that way. So the big thing is the firsthand experience. So let's turn to page 4 and let's practice this to see if we can determine what is a primary source, what is a secondary source. Okay, remember, first-hand experience we want to consider, not so much whether it's a newspaper article or a book, but does the author have first-hand experience? So again, shut off the video and go ahead and click on each of these links and indicate yes or no as to whether you think each one is a primary source or not. Okay?
Do we think this is a primary or a secondary source? Let me.
Okay, I'm Susan Shulkin from Tacoma Park, Maryland. I'm 39 years old, and I'm a consultant with the Department of Justice.
Well, Susan, can you tell us exactly where you were and what happened when you heard about the events of September the 11th?
I was at work, and I work about 5 blocks from the White House. I had come to work on the Metro and got into the office, walked back to my office, and realized I'd forgotten my keys, so I couldn't get into my office. So I walked back up to our front desk, and several people were standing around, and I thought something was going on, but I didn't know what was going on. One of the folks that I work with was there, and I said hello, and he said, "Just want to let you know that our chief just called and said he was okay." And I thought that was a strange thing to say. And I said, "Well, that's good." And this friend said, "Well, you realize he was going to New York today?" And I said, "Well, I knew he was leaving yesterday or today." And he said, "You haven't heard about the World Trade Center yet, have you?" And that's when I found out. And as it turns out, our chief had been flying, he was scheduled to fly to New York that morning and was on the runway at National Airport. And his flight was canceled. And he was on the runway getting ready to take off when the pilot came on and first said the flight's delayed, and then explained that it was canceled and explained why it was canceled. So at that point I went back to my office, and my husband called and we talked. He had heard about the World Trade Center as well. I went back out towards the front desk.
All right, we're going to stop here. Okay, what do you think? Primary. Yeah, I would say it's a primary. What were your thoughts in terms of,
okay,
because it's not, don't forget, it's being taped in the moment.
Right.
Yeah, so it's her first-hand experience.
Of her experience.
Yeah, exactly.
But not of the World Trade
Right, not
Tower.
being there, right.
Yeah, so.
Well, that was her experience, so they would have their own, I bet you had yours, do you remember where you were at?
Yeah, I remember where I was.
Where were you at?
I was at home.
Okay, so you saw it on TV,
I saw it.
so you and I had a similar experience, get your coffee turned.
Yeah, and I was like, wow.
Yeah, it looked like a Hollywood movie. Did you catch the first plane or you had the
I
second
caught
plane?
I saw it as the second plane was going
Yeah,
into
yeah.
the, yeah.
So the building was on fire.
But I
Yeah.
thought that, okay, because I thought that this was about the events of 9/11. And specifically, I thought it was going to be about when she said, "Can you tell us about," I thought it was going to be specifically about the 9/11 events. But now it appears that that is a first-hand account of her experience.
Exactly.
So at that point, yeah, not 9/11. So that's why I'm thinking, okay, so this is. So I got.
Now, how would it differ? So going with that, if it was a secondary source, what would she have been talking about?
Secondary, she said, I read the newspaper said, or the reporter, or I saw on.
Or I had a friend in
But that is what she
That's
said.
what she was saying.
She was saying that.
Well, she was in the
Somebody-
building though.
She was giving
Yeah.
she was giving an interview
Right.
of
course
her
she was.
personal, like.
Yeah.
She worked for
In what
Judge.
building? Because like, it sounded like they said that she was
No, she was in Washington.
in Washington,
Yeah, she
right,
worked
not
for
in
the
New
government.
York.
Right, and I don't, it didn't sound like she was in the Pentagon.
No, she
No,
wasn't.
No,
in
she
the-
said she was 6 blocks from the White House.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
And she
that's-
also said that the person informed her that their chief or whoever was
Yeah.
Right, was
okay.
okay.
Yeah.
He was
United States.
supposed to be in New York.
Right,
So.
and she didn't know at first what was going on. So it was clearly her account.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
I-
Yeah.
And I couldn't.
Yeah. Now, so if, let's say her boss was on one of the planes, well, I guess if it went down, he wouldn't be able to live to tell the story. I guess the only way would be, so if she had a friend in the tower that actually got out, and then later on she was recounting that friend's story. Yeah,
Then it would be-
yeah.
So, okay.
That the friend was sitting at the desk, and then all of a sudden they heard this boom, and then they looked out the windows and they, saw things going down, and they thought, okay, we got to run down the stairs. And so she's given a play-by-play of the friend's account. Then that becomes a secondary source. Yeah, because she didn't live it; she just heard it. That goes back to our telephone thing. So yeah, that was a primary. Okay, so let's try it again. Now we got two things. I'm going to show you the major newspaper, and then I want to show you a section of it, and I want you to tell me both. So let's look at the major newspaper first. Now this technically is an original paper. This is off of the Library of Congress website. Oh, here it comes. Okay. So here is the newspaper from, let me see if I can get a little bigger for you guys. So here's the newspaper, which is from, and actually you could click too from your book if you want to see it on your screen.
September.
Yeah, September 3rd, 1916. Okay, so here's the major. And then we're going to look at this little section here. So if we consider the newspaper in and of itself, write down, do you think that is a primary or secondary source? Primary. Okay. We said it as a group, but okay. No, that's all right. So primary, I think okay. So now for the second, yeah, click on the second link, and you should get this, which is a portion of the paper. And go ahead and read that, and think about, do you think this is primary or secondary?
Secondary,
And why do you think it's secondary?
because they got this information from a docket.
Okay.
Which tells me that it probably was some type of legal paper gathered by some lawyer somewhere.
Okay, yes, that's really the big question. That's what I would think too. So if, and especially since it's by the Associated Press, which seems like then it's one step, so so the question, so we know the newspaper didn't go themselves. We didn't send our own reporters.
They weren't involved.
Right, right. So now now the second question is, from the Associated Press, did the person actually go to the courthouse and view the docket themselves? Or did they get information from maybe an attorney who called them, who reported on this? And if so, then definitely we got a secondary source here. So yeah, this one's a little more confusing. I would lean towards secondary source because it does not seem like primary unless I knew that that person actually went to the courtroom
Or
or
was it
courthouse
part
and
of
saw
the
the
35
docket.
divorce?
Pardon me?
Or part of the proceedings that was stricken?
To see,
Or one
right.
of the couples?
Right, right. Did they view that or did they hear? Was that
Really
before?
one of
Right. Or did they just go to the courthouse and somebody from the courthouse just communicate that? So again, they didn't see it, yeah. So that is closer to secondary
Can I
source.
ask you a question?
Yeah,
Okay, so it said, that this happened on September 2nd, right?
yeah,
And the newspaper article was from September 3rd.
yeah.
Right.
So would
Next
that
day.
let us know that
No.
it's second as well or no?
Not if the person actually went still. You know what I'm
Okay,
saying?
gotcha.
Because they would still be firsthand experience.
Okay.
Yeah, even though it's a day late.
Would a clue be?
And wait, hold on. Just like what happened, so this woman, let's say she, who had the audio recording,
Right.
if she told you this story now, would she be telling you from as a primary source or a secondary source?
It will still be primary.
Right.
Oh, wait.
It'll be her.
Well, no, because, see, that's where I think the Minnesota video is a little off. Yeah, because she's still a primary, it's just like the Jackie Robinson letters. You know, even though it was written in the contemporary times, he wrote those letters.
Right.
That's why I say focus on first-hand experience, not whether.
So not timing, we're focusing on who had the experience.
Yeah, I don't
and
like
who
that
told
they generalize that because I don't think it's an absolute.
Okay.
So if I'm coming to you as like that woman, or even myself, so this is what happened on September 11, 2001. I got up, I had a cup of coffee, I turned on the TV, I saw one building on fire. you know, about 10 minutes later, I see this plane coming through there. And even though it's 2016, it's still a primary source because this is my first-hand experience. Yeah. So the fact that it's 2nd or 3rd September doesn't really matter. It's just, did the person actually go and get first-hand experience? Actually, let me ask you this. Like what are, do they still do Star Magazine or those kind of?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's use that. So is the Star Magazine a primary or secondary source? Again, we're making a,
It's all
yeah.
secondary.
Yeah, so, right, even though it might be primary in the sense of it's written today, it's sort of, it is a,
It's always
Yeah. Exactly.
Primary source.
yeah,
informs us
exactly,
that-
exactly. So those are all secondary sources, yeah.
So then, is it okay to say that if it's not personal experience, it's secondary?
And more than likely it's going to be secondary, yeah, yeah. And again, it may be questionable, because this is questionable. We don't really know, based on what we see here. It seems secondary, but we don't really know unless we know the facts of, like I said, did you go to the courthouse? Did you see it? Yes.
So in terms of citing for a research paper, let's just throw this out
Yeah.
since we're here.
Yeah.
If you said, oh, I have some information from this article, I have a piece of the article, if I was to use this piece, I would actually have to cite your website as far as where I got it from, correct?
Well, actually, this is coming from the Library of Congress, yeah. And Library of Congress actually has a citation. So,
Right.
yeah, you would be going to that citation.
But if let's say I didn't know where you got it from, but this is.
Yeah, if I'm the last source,
Yeah,
then you
then I
probably would have to
cite
cite
you.
the secondary
Right,
source.
that's
Yeah,
what I-
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
very good, yeah.
Okay, so my question
Yeah.
is, I mean, for two reasons, I would say that this is a secondary source. And one is because it's so impersonal, first, by Associated Press,
Yeah.
which is one thing, it doesn't give a particular person or whatever,
Right.
so I can't go to Dr. Lanigan and say, Dr.
Right.
Lanigan, you know, what about this,
Right.
first. But secondly, down at the bottom, it says, according to legal opinion.
Yeah, but we don't know if they're saying the legal opinion is in regards to that
In
they're
many
legally
instances,
divorced and
though.
have to remarry, or if the legal opinion has to relate to the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what's kind of confusing with
Okay.
this. Yeah, yeah. That's why I said this one's a little complex. It's not very, but you're going to run into that.
Mhm.
And so you have to, I just want you to question those things. And remember, the first-hand experience, that's the key to really sort of differentiate, is this a primary source, isn't it? Okay, let's try another one. So even this workbook, I developed the workbook. The workbook as a whole is a primary source, but I have links and stuff that makes it, those links become secondary sources, yeah. Because I didn't develop that newspaper. There are going to be journal articles in there that I'm linked to that I didn't develop that. So sometimes it can be, it's not all, not one thing or the other. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. So we want to, again, first-hand experience, that's the key. I thought the little hand in that video was key. All right, so here we go. Now, we're going to link up this is going to an article I wrote. So in this article, we have, if you look at it, there's, just like all articles, there's an introduction and a literature review. Okay? And then I carry out an actual study. So then the question becomes, is this article primary or secondary source?
Is it a mixture?
Yeah, exactly. And so what part is the primary source? The actual study that I carried out would be the primary, and what's the secondary?
All the
People
that you
decided.
use to do the study.
Yeah, and even in the literature review, though, that gets a little tricky because sometimes I cite other studies that I did. So in those cases, that part would be the primary. Yeah. So I would be part of the, there would be some primary, but there would be a lot of secondary. So yeah, it gets a little tricky there sometimes. Okay, let's try another one. So here we have another one. Now everybody pull this up if you can. This is the last link on page 4. And kind of peruse this study here. And what do you think we got going here? And is this a primary or a secondary source, or is it a
It
combination?
looks like a combination. Yeah.
Look at it closely now. Look at it closely. Don't just.
Well, I think it's sites within the writing, so wouldn't that make it a mixture?
I'm gonna say, secondary. And the reason why is in the very first, what they say they're doing is summarizing and critically examining literature, focus on the 8 main topics. And that's a very good beginning.
I also see it says we define, review, and critique the published research for each topic. So that lets me know that these are items that have already been published and researched, published, and they are going to, it's like it's a study of the studies.
Yeah.
Right. But now, let's see, because I agree, we definitely have, majority is secondary. Let's just see what they did, because,
They asked 12 questions, 12,
where are you, what page is that? Because I didn't see any research questions.
Research question, yeah, they got research questions they did.
What page?
That's at page 280, 250. It's research question 2.
So page 10.
That's for future research. That's for future discussion and future research. So, and let's just see what they did here. See, I think they were just they did a content analysis.
Oh, yeah, right.
But what did they? Let's see, content analysis of the use of structure capacitors given its content.
It's a long read.
This is yeah, this is just, yeah. I would say mostly.
Yeah, mostly secondary in this
Yeah.
area where they did content analysis. It's kind of tricky. It's interesting because they didn't really propose any research questions that I saw ahead of time. It looks like for this one subset of their literature review, they did a content analysis. And so, yeah, perhaps in this little part here, we have some primary source in the sense that they're analyzing past research. But otherwise, the majority of it is secondary. Yeah, these
Yeah, well,
research
you can,
questions. Yeah.
Well, you can find whether it's, the site, they, too many citations
Okay.
in the literature there.
What
And
page
on
are you on?
page 243,
243.
man, I don't see a whole lot of citations there.
Oh, well, they
But
discussing
yeah,
the
Tiffany.
means to identify the articles and.
Well, it looks like
Or
they
all
have
that
their own
information in there,
research too, so.
the
it
final
looks like it's
discussion.
Wait, Lauren, say that again.
Right before
I said
the,
they had their own research too, because they said the reviewed studies and the results of our meta-analysis suggest X, Y, Z, so they did research on their own too, and found their own
Yeah, wait.
information.
What page are you on?
This is 255
Yeah.
for discussion and future research.
Yeah, that looks like it's coming from the content analysis that they did. So, again, we have a combination, we have majority secondary, because the journal article as a whole was meant to be as a literature review, but then they did do a little portion of their own analysis, which would be primary. And just as a side, though, we're going to talk a little bit more about it. Do you think that, would you want to use a literature review as one of your articles? Yours?
especially if it's the same or similar, information. So say
Yeah,
we're
same
doing
topic.
word of mouth communication.
Okay.
A lot of literature reviews are on word of mouth communication, but they all have like a special component, whether it's using the internet or face to face.
Yeah, what happens if you find a literature review? How is that lucky for you?
It is
Just
so
go
good.
Just go to the bibliography.
It's short of your research because you're able to pick out
Yeah.
stuff they get
The
credit.
style.
Yeah, you might already see the gaps just from the literature review, which then would allow you to go, right, it would save you a lot of work. Not every area has literature reviews, but if you're lucky to find one, you definitely want to get a hold of one if you can. Okay, good. So again, when we think of it, because you're going to be using mostly primary sources, but as you can see, some of it may include secondary sources, and that's okay. Okay, in the sense of when it's a journal article, that all journal articles aren't going to be 100% primary source, that it could be a combination of the two. But what we're not going to do is, more than likely, I can't see why you would, there would be no reason to bring in a newspaper, there would be no reason to bring in a magazine, unless you were sort of making an introductory point for some reason. So if you're doing something, I guess, as a PR person or maybe as a media person, but otherwise I can't see that there would be a need for that, okay? But that the majority will probably be a combination of the two. But now we're going to talk a little bit more about the 5 types of journal articles, starting with empirical studies, because most of your articles, the majority of your articles are going to be in regards to empirical research.
Okay, now that you can differentiate between primary and secondary sources, next we're going to examine empirical research, which is typically a primary source that is found within journal articles. So if you turn to page 5 of the workbook, you'll see empirical research. Now once again, using your own words, how would you define empirical research? Go ahead and turn the video off, and then write down your definition and then come back. So after you write your definition, go ahead and see how your definition compares to the definition composed by Irwin. So go ahead and click the link below and then come back to the video. Okay, so as you can see from Irwin's article on what is empirical research, that there needs to be some type of direct observation or experience. You're studying a particular subject, and then you're generating hypotheses or research questions. You actually carry out some type of study, so there's some kind of testing of your hypotheses. You determine the results and you make conclusions. So this is there's a process to empirical research, and it's usually more on the scientific side, again, observation, direct experience, and so forth. Now, just because a study is empirically based, that doesn't mean that the results are absolute, because all studies come with limitations. And as your textbook author has pointed out, that there are 3 major limitations to most empirical studies. Those usually involve sampling, measurement, and isolating the problems. So let's review my research study to see how these limitations may manifest in empirical studies. So let's go to page 5 of this study. So if you click the link, you should get to my study. And let's scroll down. My study's actually, let me just introduce that there. So my study is about self-efficacy instruments. I want to see if they're comparable to knowledge and skills tests in a training evaluation. So if we go to page 5, I actually indicate the subjects used. And like most studies, the subjects of who you get while you're trying to get a sample of the population, you also are limited by who is available to you. So in this case, I have 98 trainees who attended a 4-hour cover letter workshop. And all the trainees were in the final phases of their certification programs and applying for new jobs. Now, we don't really know if these 98 individuals are really representative of the population as a whole, which really would be practically the entire population. So like with most studies, sampling issues are always a limitation on empirical studies. And a lot of times too, you'll see when you go through the journal articles, a lot of times the studies are psychology students. There's a lot of studies that use students because that's the pool that is available to the researchers. So with that said, those particular subjects may not really represent the entire population. So that's something you want to be aware of. The second thing is how does the researcher measure the particular item of focus. Now in this case, if you go to page 6, I actually show you one of the instruments that I'm using, which is the self-efficacy instrument. And you can see that the self-efficacy instrument is a self-assessment, and they're actually using a high to low confidence scale. And so again, here there's some limitations because what happens if the subjects don't self-assess correctly? They could overinflate their confidence or they could underinflate their confidence. And that creates a limitation within the measurement that is being used. So similar to my study, that also happens in other studies. A lot of times instruments are used where there's self-assessments, or even when observers are used, sometimes the raters, even though you can assess rater reliability, there could be limitations in terms of how the rater is assessing. So instruments, raters, all sorts of problems can create some limitations. So you want to be aware of that. The other thing, and now I've turned to page 7 in our workbook, the other thing is the isolation of the problem. And what that means is that because studies can't measure everything, that they're limited on what they're measuring. So in my case, I'm looking at self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is the confidence one has to carry out a task or tasks. Now, self-efficacy is really a state of mind, and it's influenced by a number of factors. It could be influenced by one's upbringing, it could be influenced by one's experiences, attitudes, and so forth. So self-efficacy is pretty complex, and so the fact that we're isolating it could actually limit or affect the study because humans are much more complex, which you can't, humans don't isolate aspects of themselves. They are interrelated, they're integrated, and then it manifests into something greater. So all studies on some level, especially those that are isolating aspects, whether it be motivation, maybe a particular nonverbal cue or something, because humans don't isolate, that creates some limitations within the study. So that would be the third limitation that you want to look for. So let's go again and practice this. We're going to click on this link to this study, and I want you to go ahead and spend the next 10 minutes, look over the study. You could start with pages 1 and 2 to get a general overview, but then go to the methods section on page 6 and kind of determine what do you think some of the sampling limitations are. And then go to page 6 and look at the procedures and measurements and see what you think those limitations are. And then finally, what do you think the problem, the way they've identified the problem and limited it, what do you think that is problematic? Okay, so go ahead and take 10 minutes, shut off the video, go ahead and look at the article, pull up this article, and then come back to the video. So after looking at the article and looking at the methods as well as the procedures and measures, you notice that there's some limitations with the sampling. First of all subjects are from one university. All of the subjects were required to be in a romantic relationship, and the subjects received extra credit in exchange for participating. Let's hear a little more from the class as a whole in terms of their thoughts about this.
So if we're looking at the population of the whole, then undergraduates are kind of limited in terms of we have a rather diverse user group on Facebook. Okay, what other problems do we have?
They were giving credit, course credit. For
Yeah, extra credit.
It's like, okay.
Yeah, extra credit. And what's the other thing that I thought was kind of, between that extra credit, there's something else that was a requirement.
It was
Yeah.
They had to be in a relationship.
Yeah.
Romantic.
So the question is, do they have to be in a relationship before? And then how do they do that? So only those in a relationship are allowed to get extra credit? You know what I'm saying? And then what happens if you were, when you signed up, you were in the relationship, and then you were, so you want the extra credit, aren't you gonna fake it?
They gonna lie their way.
Yeah,
I also
yeah.
thought about the Facebook use, like what if you didn't have an account, you just created one so you can get the extra credit as well? Like, was the requirement that you already have been on Facebook, or did you open up an account just to get the extra
Well,
credit?
that's a good point, and I don't think they use actual accounts, it looks like they use screen captures, but that's a good point. So like I think I originally, like 5-7 years ago, made a Facebook page for HP&T program, but I've never, you know, so for me, if they showed me something, I'd be like, I don't really have the full sense of it, because I don't really use it. So that's a good point, because then the question is, maybe they assume that all undergrads have used it. I don't know if that's,
But-
so, yeah, I don't, yeah.
I felt like they should have used multiple screenshots, not just the two that they used to see if somebody would say high or low. He said, I really enjoyed last night. I guess that was supposed to be a hybrid. And then the other message was, we have not talked in a while. I hope to catch you soon. Just showing those two messages might not really get a response that they're looking for.
Okay, so that's a good point, that they were limited in terms of the screenshots they use. So yeah, so here we got some method problems. What else is going with the screenshots? What else can you see being a limitation of that? Yeah.
They use paper and computer.
Yeah.
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 And I thought it was interesting because one of the requirements was for you to use this online
Yeah.
entity, and then you give me paper
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah.
is this threatening?
Yeah, and really, why do you need to presently be in a relationship too? Since you're using a hypothetical partner, you know what I'm saying? So could you? Isn't it just imagination to begin with? So that's kind of interesting. Yeah. Anything else? Was there anything else in the methods? Yeah.
The female to male ratio I felt was a little off.
Okay.
Because I don't want to generalize or hurt the population in the room. But females tend to view things a little differently
Yeah.
than males as
Yeah.
far as relationship and what's.
Well, usually men aren't as astute, I think.
How?
I know, which I thought was interesting. Did you read in the beginning too, where they said sometimes undergrads don't realize they have relationship problems until they see on Facebook? And I'm thinking, is this just the male undergrads, or is this the females too? Because usually
Yeah,
females
that's
are a little
biased.
more
It's biased.
intuitive. Well, females I think are a little more intuitive, not always, but you know that they know when something's wrong. Whereas the guy is like, oh, I can see Facebook being an advantage. Well, I
Yeah,
didn't realize we had a
different
problem.
frequency.
You know, she's giving some nonverbals and he's not picking up.
Look
on
like they
it.
all agreeing with you.
Yeah,
Look
you
like they
got-
all agreeing with you too.
You gotta spell it out for you guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
There could
Spell
be
it
a
out.
problem with these 500 people that use, that their partners, their dating partners wasn't part of this study.
Yeah, it's not really, what's the point of having a dating partner if you're showing a hypothetical? Yeah.
And then they tested the questions on 100 other random people first to see what they
Right.
thought about
Yeah.
them, and then tested these.
I mean, I think that was good, because then you can actually measure was the random people versus the ones that was in the
Well, and let's talk about the instrument. So they're using a Likert scale. So we're actually, measuring attitude. And so then the question is, once again, is there overinflating their attitude or their feelings, or underflating, or is it a true representation?
I don't think
Yeah.
it's true, because
Yeah.
using just six markers,
Yeah.
like, that's not much.
Right, and you're it's hypothetical, it's not real. And then you got those two situations.
Add like 10%.
Yeah, yeah. So we had some concerns over the procedures and measures. And then finally, what about the problem isolations? So here we're kind of isolating the idea of how are you going to feel if you see a high threat versus low threat message on Facebook. So what are some, if this was in real life, what other factors would be filling in besides this hypothetical screen capture?
How often do you look on Facebook? How often are you on Facebook?
Or if you know So if you know the relationship, because you can see it on Facebook, if I don't know that that's his friend, that they crack those kind of jokes, or if you, you know, you may know the relationship between them versus somebody else that's just looking at it.
Exactly. All relationships come with a history, right? So you gauge what's going on in the present by what's happened in the past. We don't have that history at play when we look at a headshot of, you know, a hypothetical, right? What else might come into play? You kind of, who was talking about, who just said it kind of with the friends? Doesn't friends and family, and especially with women, because women, I don't know, you can speak for the men now, but you know, the women kind of talk to each other, oh, he did this, you know, what do you think? And so we sort of gauge what men do based on what our friends think. Oh no, you're reacting.
Yeah, I gotta see it.
You know,
I gotta see it. I can't hear it.
An attitudinal incident after you talk to your girlfriend, you might say, oh no, it's not a problem. Versus if you're
Facts. Give me the facts. Give me the facts.
Now that I'm older, I don't because you learn, oh, that's just men. But now, do you guys? You know, see,
I want the facts.
Now, you know what? No, here's how men work.
Okay.
Men would be like, oh no, it's not a problem. And then if you have a female friend, and she goes, oh no, that's a problem. See, so that would be an interesting study, because then the hypothetical.
You already did the study already.
Yeah, and we should see, because I would think the hypothetical, the men would sort of underinflate, but in real world, we should be kicking it up two notches. You got a problem.
Right.
So, yeah, so we got a bunch of things in this study that, again, no study's going to be perfect, but this could be a concern, and if you were going to go beyond the study, you could actually acknowledge these limitations to help build your rationale for your study.
To summarize then, we see that there are at least three sampling limitations in the study. We got, like I said before, all subjects from one university. They all were required to be in romantic relationships. They received extra credit, which could bias their answers. As far as the method or the measures and procedures, they use screenshots of hypothetical partners, which really isn't true to real life. They also used a Likert scale to have the people answer, which could present problems in overestimating or underestimating their attitude toward the responses. And when it came to problem isolation, the fact that the study doesn't take into account that there's no history accounted for. In real life, people respond to other people based on the history of their past interactions, and also they interpret how people act based on what their friends think of certain responses. So all of these are the various limitations that have manifested from this study. Now that you understand the major issues with empirical research, next let's discuss what other types of articles you might come across when you search the databases and pull up journal articles. So besides empirical studies, there are 4 other types of journal articles. There's theoretical, there's literature reviews, there's anecdotal, and there are professional standards and practices. So let's begin with theoretical. Theoretical articles usually propose a theory or model, or they make critique an existing theory, or sometimes they compare theories. So let's look at 2 examples. So if you go ahead and pull up, again, you can stop the video and then go ahead and click on the link and peruse that study. This is something that I did with a professor when I was in grad school doing my master's. And then the second one is another study that I want you to pull up so you could get a sense of the differences in theoretical studies, and then come back to the video when you're done. Okay, besides theoretical, there's also literature reviews. Now, literature reviews usually provide you an overview of what's going on in the field. Sometimes they'll provide new ways of looking at studies. They may also do some critiquing. It actually is worthwhile if you can find a literature review for a topic that you're pursuing, because it would give you quite a lot of information. So to give you some examples, again, here's 2 examples. So go ahead and close the video for now and click on each of the links and get a sense of what literature review articles look like. Okay, the third type are anecdotal accounts. Now, unlike observations that are usually based on some type of scientific testing, anecdotal accounts are reports based on experience. So the typical audience for these articles are usually practitioners. And I give you two examples that I have used for the performance technology field, which is training and development. And why don't you go ahead and turn off the video again and look at these articles. And then lastly, we have professional standards and practices. These are actually a little more difficult to find. I had a real hard time finding a professional practice one or standards, but I did find one for PR in terms of defining a PR. So go ahead and again turn off the video and check out this article and then come back. Okay, so I am now on page 10. And as you can see, when you do your database search, you're going to come across a variety of articles, and that's great. You know that you can use any of those 4 articles, any 4 article types, including empirical studies. Actually, you're probably going to use mostly empirical studies, but you're likely going to complement those with some theoretical articles and perhaps a literature review if you can find it. And then if you want to add some value by throwing in an anecdotal article or two, or professional standards, if you could find that, feel free to do so. Now, your paper's purpose is going to be more like a research article. Your textbook author talks about 3 types of purposes. There could be classroom term paper, there could be thesis, dissertation, or research article. Yours is going to focus more toward the research article. And so what that means is usually a research article, the characteristics is it's usually typically shorter. It's definitely shorter than a thesis and a dissertation, for sure. Depending on the professor and how they assign the term paper might even be a little longer. So yours is going to be a little shorter, a little more practical, and it's going to be more concrete. So you're going to focus on an introduction and a literature review that provides background information on the subject of focus and, of course, that rationale for your study. You want to make sure, again, you go to our class website to download the criteria sheet to review the research paper criteria, the specifics, so you know what is required. But again, yours is going to be more like a research article. And that'll do it for today's lesson.